My phone buzzed at exactly 9:17 on a Tuesday morning while I was rocking my 6-week-old daughter to sleep in the nursery. At first, I ignored it. When you're surviving on 2 hours of sleep at a time, every notification feels like another demand from a world that has forgotten your entire life, now revolves around a tiny human who doesn't care what day it is. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. Then again. I carefully laid my daughter Lily into her crib, waited through the familiar few seconds where every parent silently prays the baby stays asleep, and reached for my phone on the dresser. The message was from my manager, Jason. For a split second, I smiled. I assumed he was checking in, maybe asking how Lily was doing, maybe confirming my return date in another 6 weeks, maybe even doing the decent human thing and saying everyone at the office missed me. Instead, I opened the text and felt every bit of warmth drain from my body. Emily, due to restructuring, your position has been eliminated effective immediately. HR will email severance details later today. Please do not contact clients or employees. Best of luck moving forward. That was it. 31 words. After almost 7 years with the company, after consistently receiving the highest performance reviews on my team, after helping build a department from 4 people to nearly 40, after answering client emails from a hospital bed because I genuinely cared about the projects we were finishing before my maternity leave officially began. 31 words. I reread the message 5 times because my brain simply refused to accept that this was how someone ended a career. Not a phone call, not a meeting, not even an email, a text message. While I was legally on maternity leave, I honestly thought it had to be a mistake. Jason wasn't exactly warm or particularly empathetic, but even he couldn't possibly think firing someone this way was acceptable. Could he? My hands were shaking so badly that I accidentally opened our old team group chat instead of his conversation. Photos from the office barbecue a month earlier filled my screen. Everyone smiling. Jason standing in the middle pretending we were one big happy family. I remembered that afternoon vividly because it had been my final week before maternity leave. Jason had stood in front of everyone, holding a plastic cup of lemonade, and joked that I better enjoy my vacation because diapers were about to become my full-time job. Everyone laughed, including me. He had even hugged me before I left. "Don't worry," he'd said. "Your desk will be waiting exactly where you left it." Those words echoed inside my head while I stared at the text message that had apparently erased 7 years of loyalty. My husband, Daniel, walked into the nursery carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He looked at me once and immediately set both mugs down. What happened? I couldn't answer. I simply handed him the phone. He read the message once, then again. His jaw tightened in a way I had only seen a handful of times during our marriage. "He fired you." I nodded. "By text." I nodded again. "While you're on maternity leave?" I finally managed to whisper. "I think so." Daniel looked genuinely confused. "That can't be legal." "I don't know. It can't." I wanted him to be right, but at that moment I wasn't thinking about laws. I wasn't thinking about lawsuits. I wasn't thinking about HR. I was thinking about our mortgage, health insurance, formula, daycare we'd already reserved, every carefully planned financial decision we'd made, assuming I would return to work in 6 weeks. I started crying so suddenly it surprised even me. Not loud sobbing, just silent tears that refused to stop. Daniel wrapped his arms around me while Lily continued sleeping peacefully in the crib beside us, completely unaware that her parents' entire sense of security had just shifted because of one text message. For the next hour, I kept convincing myself there had to be more information coming. Maybe the wording was wrong. Maybe position eliminated meant they were moving me somewhere else. Maybe Jason had sent the message to the wrong employee. I checked my email every few minutes. Nothing. Around 11 o'clock, an email finally arrived from Human Resources. The subject line read, "Employment Separation Information." That was when reality settled in. The email confirmed exactly what Jason's text had said. According to the company, my role had been eliminated during a departmental restructuring. The severance package offered 6 weeks of salary. My benefits would end at the end of the month. My laptop would need to be returned within 5 business days. There was no mention of maternity leave. No thank you. No acknowledgement of my years with the company. Just legal language carefully arranged into paragraphs that somehow felt colder than Jason's text message. I stared at the attachment until the words became blurry. Then something caught my attention. The restructuring document listed only one eliminated position: mine. That seemed strange. Our department had been growing steadily for years. Only 3 weeks before I went on leave, Jason had celebrated landing our biggest client in company history. He'd even announced plans to hire 2 additional project managers. Now suddenly my position, the only one occupied by someone on maternity leave, had supposedly become unnecessary. The timing didn't feel coincidental. It felt calculated. Around lunchtime, my best friend called. Sarah had worked with me for almost 5 years before accepting a position at another company. She answered before I could even finish saying hello. I heard. My stomach dropped. You heard? One of your old teammates called me. Already? Emily? She hesitated. I don't think anyone believes the restructuring explanation. What do you mean? There wasn't any restructuring meeting. No announcement? No. They hired someone last week. I sat upright. What? A new project coordinator. Jason introduced her Monday. I closed my eyes. My heartbeat suddenly became very loud. They're hiring? Yes. And your clients are still active. Nothing was eliminated. The room became strangely quiet. I wasn't just unemployed anymore. Something didn't add up. Sarah lowered her voice. People are talking. About what? They think Jason never wanted you coming back after maternity leave. I didn't respond. Because deep down, I had wondered the same thing months earlier. Not because he'd ever said it directly, but because of dozens of little moments I'd ignored. Meetings where he'd joked that new mothers weren't as committed. Comments about how promotions required people who could dedicate themselves 100%. Questions during my pregnancy about whether I'd eventually become a stay-at-home mom. At the time, I'd dismissed every comment individually. Together, they painted a very different picture. Sarah sighed. Emily, yeah? Don't sign anything. What? The severance agreement. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because something about this feels very wrong. That evening, after Lily finally fell asleep, Daniel opened our laptop. I want to show you something. He searched for our state's employment laws. Within minutes, we were reading government guidance about maternity protections. One sentence immediately stood out. Employees on protected maternity leave generally cannot be terminated because of their leave or because they recently gave birth. I read it 3 times. Daniel looked at me. I think Jason just made the biggest mistake of his career. I wanted to believe him, but Jason had been with the company for almost 15 years. He was confident, respected, well-connected. Surely someone like him understood employment law better than we did, right? Still, something kept bothering me. Jason hadn't even tried to hide what he'd done. No meeting, no documentation beforehand. Just a text. It wasn't just cruel. It felt careless, almost arrogant, as though he believed nobody would ever question him. I had no idea then that someone already had. And somewhere, inside the company's executive offices nearly 200 miles away, a decision was quietly being made that would completely change what happened next. Because 48 hours after my boss fired me with one text message, my phone was going to ring again. This time, the caller ID would display the name of the company's CEO. For the rest of that Wednesday, I tried convincing myself not to obsess over what had happened. It wasn't easy. Every time Lily fell asleep, my mind wandered back to that text message. I replayed every conversation I'd ever had with Jason during my pregnancy. At first, they seemed harmless. Then I started remembering details I'd ignored. The day I announced my pregnancy to the leadership team, everyone congratulated me, except Jason. He smiled, but it looked forced. Instead of asking how I was feeling, he asked, "How long do you think you'll be out?" Not congratulations, not "that's wonderful," just logistics. A few weeks later, while discussing an important client presentation, he had said something that bothered me at the time, but not enough to challenge him. "I just need someone I know will actually be here long term." I'd laughed awkwardly. "I plan on coming back." He'd smiled. "We'll see. Babies change priorities." At the time, I assumed he was trying to make conversation. Now I wondered if he'd already made up his mind. Thursday morning arrived much like every other morning since Lily had been born. Feed the baby, change diapers, drink cold coffee because it had gone untouched for an hour, pretend everything felt normal. It didn't. Around 9 o'clock my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored unknown calls, especially with a newborn, but something told me to answer. Hello? A calm voice replied. Good morning. Is this Emily Carter? Yes. My name is Richard Lawson. There was a brief pause. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Harwood Technologies. For a moment, I genuinely thought someone was playing a prank. Our CEO didn't call employees, not project managers, not department leads. Certainly not someone who had supposedly been terminated 2 days earlier. I'm sorry, I said carefully. Could you repeat that? I'm Richard Lawson. I believe you've recently been informed that your employment has ended. I couldn't speak. Daniel looked up from the kitchen table where he was feeding Lily her bottle. My expression alone told him something unusual was happening. The voice continued. I understand this call may come as a surprise. Yes, it certainly does. I'd appreciate 10 minutes of your time. I swallowed. Of course. Richard didn't sound rushed. He didn't sound defensive either. He sounded concerned. I became aware yesterday afternoon that your employment ended while you were on maternity leave. Yes. I'd like to ask a few questions. Okay. Did anyone from executive leadership discuss this decision with you beforehand? No. Did Human Resources schedule a meeting? No. Were you informed that your performance had become unsatisfactory? No. Were you ever placed on a performance improvement plan? Never. Were there documented layoffs affecting your department? Not that I know of. There was another pause. Then he asked something that immediately caught my attention. Emily, did Jason terminate your employment through a text message? I looked at my phone. Still sitting there. The same message. Word for word. Yes. I still have it. I was hoping you'd say that. That sentence confused me. Not because of what he said. Because of how he said it. Almost as though he already knew. Richard sighed. I'm going to be transparent with you. I appreciate that. I received an anonymous email yesterday morning. My heartbeat quickened. The email alleged that a manager had dismissed an employee on protected maternity leave. He continued. It also included a screenshot. The text? Yes. I closed my eyes. Someone inside the company had sent it. Someone had seen what happened and refused to stay quiet. I launched an internal review immediately. Richard's voice remained calm. What we've discovered over the last 24 hours is deeply concerning. I didn't interrupt. We've reviewed staffing records, department budgets, internal emails, promotion requests, hiring approvals. None of this sounded good. For the record, Richard continued, there was never any company-approved restructuring. I felt my stomach drop. What? There was no authorized elimination of your position. So, I struggled to process the words. I wasn't laid off? No. The company never approved that action. My entire body went cold. What does that mean? It means your manager appears to have acted independently. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I couldn't decide whether to feel relieved or terrified. If the company hadn't approved my termination, what exactly had Jason done? Richard answered the question before I asked it. He submitted paperwork claiming your role had become redundant. But there wasn't any redundancy. Our finance department rejected his request. I frowned. Rejected? Yes. He resubmitted it. Twice. I stared at the wall. Each new sentence sounded worse than the last. Eventually, Richard continued, he marked the paperwork as already completed. I'm sorry. What does that mean? It means he represented your termination as though final approval had already been granted. I blinked, but it wasn't. No. Which means he stopped himself before choosing his next words carefully. He exceeded his authority. Daniel quietly moved closer, trying not to interrupt. I put the phone on speaker. Richard didn't seem to mind. I also reviewed your employment history. I've read every annual evaluation you've received. Every one? Yes. I was curious. Curious about what? Why someone with consistently outstanding performance would suddenly become unnecessary. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, Because for the first time in 3 days, someone was actually looking at facts instead of assumptions. Richard continued. You've led 23 major client implementations. Correct. You've received the President's Excellence Award twice. Yes. You've never received disciplinary action. No. You've maintained the highest client retention rate in your division. Yes. And according to our records, he paused again. You generated approximately $12 million in client revenue over the past 4 years. I hadn't realized he knew that. Very few executives paid attention to individual project managers. So, Richard said quietly, I have to ask, did Jason ever indicate he was unhappy with your work? No, never. Did he make comments regarding your pregnancy? I hesitated. Daniel nodded slowly. I took a deep breath. Sometimes. What kind of comments? I told him everything. The jokes, the questions, the comments about commitment, the repeated suggestions that becoming a mother would change my priorities. I even mentioned the conversation where he'd asked whether I planned on returning at all. Richard didn't interrupt once. When I finished, his response was barely above a whisper. I see. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Emily, I need you to know something. Okay. You are not fired. I stared at the phone. What? The text message you received does not represent the company's position. I don't understand. Effective immediately. I am rescinding your termination. For several seconds, I genuinely couldn't process the words. What? Your employment status has been fully restored. You remain on paid maternity leave. Your benefits never should have been interrupted. Your payroll will continue without interruption. I looked at Daniel. His eyes filled with tears before mine did. Richard continued. Our payroll department is correcting everything today. You'll receive written confirmation within the hour. And Emily? Yes? I owe you an apology. Not as a CEO, but as someone responsible for this company. This should never have happened. I thanked him, though honestly I wasn't sure what else to say. Before ending the call, he asked one final question. Would you be willing to meet with our legal and ethics team next week? Of course. I simply want the truth. That's all we're asking for. The call ended. The house became completely silent. Daniel looked at me. So, you still have a job? I nodded slowly. I think so. He smiled for the first time in days. Then his expression changed. What happens to Jason? I looked toward the nursery where Lily had fallen asleep again. I honestly don't know, but somewhere deep down, I had a feeling his career had already begun to unravel. Because the CEO hadn't called me just to apologize. He had called because someone inside the company had uncovered something much bigger than one illegal text message. And before the week was over, the investigation would expose exactly how far Jason had gone to make sure I never came back. The email from Human Resources arrived less than 30 minutes after my call with Richard Lawson. Unlike the cold, legal document I'd received 2 days earlier, this one felt like it had actually been written by a human being. The subject line simply read, Correction regarding your employment status inside was a formal letter confirming that my employment had never been legally terminated, my maternity leave remained fully protected, my health insurance had never actually been canceled, and every payroll adjustment made over the previous 48 hours was being reversed immediately. At the bottom was a personal note from Richard himself. Emily, I sincerely apologize for the distress this situation has caused you and your family. We are committed to addressing this matter appropriately. I read that sentence 3 times. Not because it fixed what had happened, nothing could erase those 48 hours. But because someone at the highest level of the company had acknowledged that what happened wasn't just unfortunate, it was wrong. That afternoon, my phone barely stopped ringing. First payroll, then benefits, then someone from the legal department introducing herself as Amanda. She explained that an internal investigation had officially begun. We're not asking you to prepare anything today, she said. We simply want to schedule a conversation early next week. What kind of conversation? We'd like to understand everything leading up to your maternity leave. Every conversation you remember, every email, every meeting, anything that may help establish a timeline. I agreed immediately. There wasn't much to think about. I had nothing to hide. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah. You are not going to believe what's happening. What? The office is absolute chaos. What do you mean? Jason disappeared. I frowned. What? He left around lunchtime. Nobody knows where he went. Didn't he tell anyone? No. And HR has been pulling people into conference rooms all afternoon. My curiosity immediately kicked in. Who? Basically everyone on your team. For what? They're asking questions. About you. My stomach tightened. What kind of questions? They want to know whether Jason ever made comments about your pregnancy. I stayed quiet. Sarah sighed. I wish I had told you this sooner. What? People noticed things. What things? The jokes. The comments. The way he stopped including you in planning meetings once you announced the pregnancy. I leaned back on the couch. I thought I imagined that. You didn't. He reassigned 2 of your biggest clients before you even started leave. I remember. At the time he said he was reducing my workload. Sarah laughed bitterly. Emily, he gave those clients to Ryan. Ryan, Jason's favorite employee. The same Ryan who'd been with the company less than 2 years. The more Sarah talked, the more a pattern started emerging. One incident by itself wasn't alarming. Neither were 2. But stacked together over several months, it became impossible to ignore. Jason had quietly removed me from long-term projects. He stopped inviting me to quarterly strategy meetings. He delayed approving my professional development budget after approving everyone else's. He even canceled my nomination for a leadership conference I'd attended every year. Every decision had come with a reasonable explanation, at least individually. Together, they looked very different. You know what the weirdest part is? Sarah asked. What? Everyone assumed you knew. Knew what? That Jason didn't expect you to come back. I felt my heart sink. People actually thought that? Yeah. He kept saying things. Like what? Once Emily decides motherhood is her priority, when Emily moves on, we'll need someone permanent. He said that? More than once. I closed my eyes. I had spent months assuming my career was waiting for me. Meanwhile, my own manager had apparently been speaking as though my resignation was inevitable. Except, I'd never resigned. I'd never even hinted at it. The following Monday, Daniel stayed home so I could attend the virtual interview with the company's legal team. Amanda introduced herself again. Beside her sat another attorney named Michael. Neither looked interested in defending the company. They looked interested in finding facts. Amanda smiled warmly. Emily, first of all, how are you and your daughter doing? It was such a normal question that I almost cried. We're doing okay. I'm glad. We know this has been an incredibly stressful week. She paused. Take your time today. There are no wrong answers. For nearly 2 hours, they asked careful, detailed questions. When did I announce my pregnancy? Who was present? How did Jason react? Did he ever discourage me from taking leave? Did anyone witness his comments? Did I keep emails, text messages, performance reviews? Fortunately, I kept everything. 7 years of emails, every evaluation, calendar invitations, client feedback, even handwritten notes from meetings. I've always been ridiculously organized. For the first time in my life, that habit suddenly mattered. About halfway through the meeting, Amanda asked a question that surprised me. Emily, did Jason ever ask whether you planned on having more children? I looked up. Yes. When? A few weeks before I started leave. What exactly did he say? I remembered it, almost word for word. We'd been walking back from a client meeting. Out of nowhere, he smiled and said, So, is this going to be one baby? Or are you planning a whole soccer team? I laughed politely. I don't know, he nodded thoughtfully. Well, we just need to know who we're investing leadership opportunities in. At the time, I assumed he meant long-term planning. Now Amanda looked directly at Michael. He wrote something down immediately. Amanda looked back at me. Did that comment make you uncomfortable? I didn't think much of it. But now, yes, it does. Toward the end of the interview, Michael asked one final question. Emily, if offered, would you actually want to return? I hadn't expected that. Honestly, I didn't know. Before the text message? Absolutely. After everything that happened, I wasn't sure. I loved my job. I answered honestly. I loved my team. I loved my clients. But I don't know how anyone goes back after this. Amanda nodded slowly. That's understandable. No matter what you ultimately decide, our responsibility is making this right. After the meeting ended, I felt emotionally exhausted. But strangely, I also felt lighter. For the first time since that awful Tuesday morning, someone had actually listened. 3 days passed. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Lily continued growing. Daniel went back to working remotely. I tried focusing on motherhood instead of corporate politics. Then Thursday afternoon, Sarah called again. This time she didn't even bother saying hello. Emily, it's over. What is? Jason. I sat upright. What happened? He was escorted out. My heart skipped. What? Security? Middle of the afternoon. In front of everyone. I honestly didn't know what to say. Sarah continued. They disabled his badge. Collected his laptop. Someone from corporate packed his office. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. What about everyone else? The whole floor stopped working. People just watched. Apparently Jason hadn't said much. He simply grabbed his jacket, spoke briefly with 2 executives from headquarters, and walked toward the elevators carrying a cardboard box. The same way countless employees had left companies over the years. Only this time, he was the manager, not the employee. That evening, Richard Lawson called me again. His voice sounded calmer than before. The investigation has reached its conclusion. I took a deep breath. Okay. We found multiple policy violations. What kind? Unauthorized termination. Falsification of internal approval records. Failure to follow HR procedures. And, he paused, evidence suggesting discrimination related to protected maternity leave. I stayed silent. Jason is no longer employed by Harwood Technologies. Hearing those words didn't bring the satisfaction I expected. Instead, I mostly felt relief. Relief that maybe no one else would experience what I had. Then Richard said something I wasn't expecting. Emily, there is one more thing we need to discuss. What is it? The board of directors would like to meet with you personally. I frowned. The board? Yes. They've reviewed your personnel file. They have a proposal. I looked toward Daniel, who had been listening from across the room. He raised an eyebrow. I had absolutely no idea what the board of directors could possibly want with a project manager who, just 1 week earlier, had been fired by text message. But I was about to find out, and the offer they were preparing would change not only my career, but the direction of my entire life. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Jason had fired me by text message, I found myself sitting in a conference room I'd only seen in company newsletters. Even through the video call, I recognized it immediately. It was the executive boardroom at Harwood Technologies headquarters in Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and around the polished walnut table sat people whose names I'd only ever seen attached to company-wide emails. Richard Lawson was there. So was Karen Mitchell, the chair of the board. The company's chief human resources officer sat beside her, along with the general counsel and 2 other executives I didn't recognize. I suddenly felt very underdressed in my simple sweater, sitting at my dining room table while my daughter slept upstairs. Karen smiled warmly. Emily, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. Of course. I wish it were under better circumstances. So do we. There wasn't any corporate small talk, no rehearsed introductions. Karen got straight to the point. I've reviewed your employment file personally. I've also reviewed the investigation. She paused. What happened to you was unacceptable. I appreciated that she didn't try to soften it. Nobody said words like miscommunication or unfortunate misunderstanding. They called it exactly what it was. A failure. Richard leaned forward. I'd like to share something you probably don't know. I nodded. When the investigation began, we reviewed not only Jason's decisions, but also your actual contributions to this company. I smiled politely. I assumed my annual reviews already covered that. They did, but not completely. He opened a folder. In the past 7 years, you managed 38 enterprise projects. You maintained a 98% client retention rate. You received more unsolicited client praise than anyone in your division. I blinked. I didn't know that. Neither did we. He smiled slightly. Until we started looking. The chief revenue officer joined the conversation. 3 of our largest clients specifically requested you by name. They told us they stayed with Harwood because of you. That surprised me more than anything. My clients had always been kind. I just never imagined executives noticed. Karen folded her hands. Emily, I'd like to ask you something. Okay. Had Jason never sent that text message, would you still see yourself building a long-term career here? I answered honestly. Absolutely. I loved my work. I loved solving problems. I loved helping clients. And I genuinely believed this company valued people. She nodded slowly. I'm glad you said that. Because we'd like an opportunity to prove that we still do. The proposal came in stages. First, Richard officially confirmed that every record relating to my termination had been permanently removed from my employment history. According to company records, it had never happened. Second, the company would continue paying my maternity leave exactly as originally planned. Every benefit, every retirement contribution, every bonus calculation, nothing would be interrupted. Third, Karen looked directly into the camera. We are offering you compensation for the emotional distress and professional disruption caused by this incident. I wasn't expecting that. Our legal department has prepared a settlement. It does not require you to waive your employment. It does not require confidentiality. It simply acknowledges our responsibility. The amount they mentioned made me completely speechless. Daniel, listening quietly from the next room, nearly dropped his coffee. I had never imagined the company would voluntarily offer something like that. Then Richard smiled. We're not finished, I laughed nervously. I had a feeling. He slid another folder across the table. Jason's position is vacant. I looked at him, confused. So, we're not filling it externally. It took me a second to understand. Karen finished the sentence. We would like you to become Director of Client Operations. I honestly thought I'd misunderstood. I'm sorry. The director? Yes. My old boss's job? Richard nodded. The position reports directly to me until the new regional vice president is appointed. I couldn't find words. The director role had been Jason's dream job. He'd talked about it constantly. He'd once told our team only people willing to sacrifice everything ever reached executive leadership. Now, it was being offered to the woman he'd tried to remove from the company. I don't know what to say. Karen smiled. You don't have to answer today. We know you've just become a mother. We know you've had an incredibly difficult week. We simply want you to know that your future here should be determined by your talent, not someone else's prejudice. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Then I asked the only question that mattered. If I accept, will people think I only got the job because of what happened? Richard answered immediately. No, you were already qualified. The investigation simply forced us to finally notice it. That sentence stayed with me, because it wasn't entirely about Jason anymore. It was about how easy it is for good work to become invisible until something goes wrong. After the meeting ended, Daniel sat beside me on the couch. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, he smiled. So, you just got offered your boss's job. I laughed for the first time in over a week. I think I did. What are you thinking? I looked upstairs toward Lily's room. I'm thinking, I don't want my daughter growing up believing she has to stay quiet when someone treats her unfairly. Daniel squeezed my hand. Then I think you already know your answer. 2 weeks later, after spending several days talking it over with my family, I accepted the position. I returned to work 6 weeks after my maternity leave ended. Walking through the office felt surreal. The same reception desk, the same elevators, the same hallway where I'd spent years carrying coffee into Monday morning meetings. But one thing had changed. People looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with gossip, with respect. Several coworkers quietly welcomed me back. A few apologized for not speaking up sooner. One admitted he had almost reported Jason months earlier, but convinced himself it wasn't his place. I told him something I genuinely believed. The important thing is that someone finally did. Jason's old office had been completely cleared. When I walked inside for the first time, it felt strangely empty. The expensive framed awards were gone. The family photos had disappeared. Only the desk remained. I didn't keep it. On my first day, I asked facilities to replace it with a simple standing desk, exactly like the one I'd used as a project manager. The receptionist laughed. Most people upgrade. I smiled. I already did. Not because of the furniture. Because I'd finally learned something I wished I'd understood years earlier. Titles don't make leaders. Character does. It's been almost 3 years since that text message appeared on my phone at 9:17 on a Tuesday morning. Lily is now old enough to run through the house wearing superhero capes she insists make her faster. Daniel still teases me about checking every unknown phone number before answering. And every time my phone buzzes unexpectedly, I remember the worst text message I ever received. But I also remember the phone call that came 2 days later. The one that reminded me that one person's authority doesn't define your worth. Sometimes the person trying hardest to convince you that you're replaceable is quietly making themselves the easiest person to replace. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Never let someone else's opinion become your identity. The people who underestimate you are often judging the version of you they've invented in their own minds, not the person you've actually worked so hard to become. And sometimes, the truth doesn't need revenge. It just needs enough time to reach the right person.